the freight hauler. Steady progress groaned as it docked at Kepler Station. Jin-Ho Kim wiped his hands on his coveralls and looked out the small porthole at the massive structure before him. The station was bigger than any city he had ever seen. Metal and glass stretched in all directions, with ships coming and going like busy insects around a hive. "Remember, kid, Level 47 Section C," Captain Martinez called from the bridge. "Environmental systems are acting up again. The aliens who run this place are paying good money to fix it." Jin-Ho nodded and grabbed his toolbox. He had been working on ships for 12 years, ever since he left home on Earth. Broken air recyclers, faulty water pumps, busted heating units. He had fixed them all. This job should be simple enough. The airlock hissed open and Jin-Ho stepped onto Kepler Station for the first time. The corridor was huge, with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing softly in colors that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The air smelled like ozone and something sweet he could not identify. Other beings walked past him without paying much attention. He saw tall, thin creatures with too many arms, short, fuzzy ones that moved in groups, and others that looked almost human except for their bright purple skin. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Jin-Ho pulled out his work tablet and checked the job details again. Level 47, Section C. The problem was finding it in this maze of corridors and tunnels. The station map on his tablet kept changing languages every few seconds, switching between symbols he did not recognize. He stopped a passing alien who looked like a walking tree with eyes. "Excuse me, do you know how to get to level 47? The creature made a sound like wind through leaves and pointed down a corridor with one of its branch arms. Jin-Ho thanked it and headed in that direction. After 20 minutes of walking, he was completely lost. The corridors all looked the same, and his tablet had given up trying to translate the signs. The few aliens he asked for directions either did not understand him or gave confusing answers that involved concepts like temporal left and following the quantum flow. Jin-Ho sat down on a bench that seemed designed for someone with 3 legs and tried to think. He was supposed to meet someone named Hana Park in the administration office, but he had no idea how to find her either. His stomach rumbled, reminding him that he had not eaten since breakfast. A maintenance hatch caught his eye. It was small and round, about the right size for a human to crawl through. Back on Earth, when he got lost in the big industrial complexes, he would sometimes use the maintenance tunnels to find his way around. Maybe the same trick would work here. He opened the hatch and peered inside. The tunnel was clean and well lit, with what looked like normal human-sized spaces. There were even arrows painted on the walls pointing in different directions. Finally, something that made sense. Jin-Ho squeezed into the tunnel, pulling his toolbox behind him. The space was comfortable enough, and the arrows seemed to be leading him deeper into the station. He crawled for several minutes following the painted directions and hoping they would take him to level 47. The tunnel opened into a small chamber with what looked like an elevator. There was a single button with a symbol that might have meant down, or possibly up, or maybe sideways into another dimension. Alien technology was confusing that way. He pressed the button. The elevator moved smoothly, though Jin-Ho could not tell if he was going up or down. When it stopped, the doors opened to reveal another corridor, this one even stranger than the ones above. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that pulsed with inner light. The air was warmer here, and he could hear a low humming, sound coming from everywhere and nowhere. This must be the engineering level, he said to himself. That would explain all the strange noises and the warm air from running machinery. He walked down the corridor looking for any sign that would tell him where he was. The toolbox felt heavier than usual, and he was starting to sweat in the warm air. At the end of the corridor was a large circular door with more glowing symbols around its edge. Jin-Ho approached the door, hoping to find someone who could give him directions. As he got close, the door began to open by itself. Beyond it was a room filled with soft blue light and a gentle breeze that felt cool against his face. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound like thunder. Jin-Ho spun around and grabbed the handle, but it would not budge. He pushed buttons, pulled levers, and even kicked the door, but nothing worked. He was trapped. "Great," he muttered. Just great. The room was larger than he had thought. The blue light came from strips in the ceiling that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. The walls were covered with screens showing views of space, weather, patterns, and scrolling text in a dozen different languages. One screen showed what looked like a countdown timer, but the numbers kept changing in ways that made no mathematical sense. In the center of the room stood a pedestal with a single, red button. Above it, holographic text appeared in the air, cycling through different languages. For a brief moment it showed English. Survival protocol initiated. Participant registered. Beginning crucible sequence. Jinho blinked at the words, trying to understand what they meant. Before he could figure it out, the text changed to symbols that looked like angry geometric shapes having an argument. The floor began to shake and new lights started flashing on the walls. A voice spoke from hidden speakers using a language that sounded like music mixed with static. Even though he could not understand the words, the tone was clear enough. Something important was happening, and he was probably in the wrong place. Above him, in the station's control center, Hana Park was having the worst day of her career. She stared at the screen showing the Crucible's entrance chamber, where a human in work clothes stood looking confused and slightly annoyed. No, 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 she whispered, reaching for her communicator. Not again. The Crucible of Existence was not a maintenance area. It was the most dangerous survival challenge in the known galaxy, designed by the best engineers of 12 different civilizations. Warriors trained for years just for the chance to attempt it. Most of them died within the first few hours, and somehow a human repairman had just wandered into it by accident. The screens showed environmental systems spinning up, atmospheric processors switching to hostile mode, and gravity generators preparing to create the first challenge zone. Once the sequence started, it could not be stopped. The Crucible's AI was designed to be absolutely fair. No outside interference, no emergency exits, no second chances. Hana watched the human examine the control pedestal with the casual interest of someone trying to figure out how to work a coffee machine. He had no idea what was about to happen to him. She grabbed her emergency communicator and started making calls. The human government would need to be notified. The Nexari Council would demand explanations. The betting pools would go insane when they realized a maintenance worker had entered their most sacred trial. But first, she had to try to warn him, even though she knew the communication systems would not work once the Crucible was fully active. Tech. The screen. Jinho Kim shrugged and pressed the red button, apparently deciding it was worth a try. The countdown timer hit 0, and the first challenge zone began to materialize around him. The world around Jinho changed in an instant. One moment he was standing in a warm room with blue lights, and the next he was freezing cold in a place that looked like the worst winter he had ever seen. Snow fell from a dark sky, driven by winds, that cut through his coveralls like they were made of paper. Ice covered everything as far as he could see. Strange rock formations jutted up from the frozen ground, shaped like twisted fingers reaching toward the storm clouds above. What the hell? Jinho said, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. He looked around for the room he had just been in, but it was gone. There was nothing but ice and snow in every direction. His toolbox sat in the snow beside him, already getting covered by the falling flakes. He picked it up and started walking, figuring that standing still in this cold would be a bad idea. His work boots crunched through the snow with each step. The wind howled around the rock formations, making sounds that almost seemed like voices. Jinho ignored them and focused on staying warm. He had worked on mining stations in cold places before, though nothing quite this extreme. After walking for 10 minutes, he found what looked like the ruins of some kind of building. Metal beams stuck out of the ice at strange angles, and there were pieces of equipment scattered around that. Looked expensive but broken. Somebody sure made a mess of this place, he said, kneeling down to examine one of the metal pieces. It was made of some kind of alloy he did not recognize, but it conducted heat well. That gave him an idea. He opened his toolbox and pulled out his portable plasma cutter. The device was designed for cutting through ship hulls, but it would work just as well for salvaging useful materials. He began cutting the metal beams into manageable pieces. As he worked, something moved in the snow behind him. He turned to see a creature about the size of a large dog, covered in white fur that made it almost invisible against the ice. It had too many teeth and eyes that glowed pale blue. The creature circled him slowly, making a sound like grinding glass. Jinho had seen enough dangerous animals on frontier worlds to know this one was sizing him up for lunch. "Not today, buddy," he said, picking up a length of metal pipe from his salvage pile. The creature lunged at him with surprising speed. Jinho swung the pipe and connected with its head, sending it tumbling into the snow. It shook itself off and backed away, making angry noises. 2 more creatures appeared from behind the rocks, then 3 more. They moved like a pack, trying to surround him. Jinho looked at the metal pieces he had been cutting and had another idea. He pulled out a small roll of copper wire from his toolbox, the kind used for electrical repairs. Working quickly, he wrapped the wire around several pieces of metal, creating what looked like a crude coil. The creatures crept closer, sensing that their prey was distracted. The largest one prepared to jump. Jinho connected the wire coil to his plasma cutter's power cell and tossed it into the snow between himself and the pack. The improvised electromagnetic device hummed to life, creating a field that made the metal in the area vibrate and spark. The creatures yelped and jumped back as small electrical arcs danced across the ice. Whatever these things were, they did. Not like electricity. They retreated to a safe distance, circling but not approaching. "That should keep you busy for a while," Jinho said, gathering up more metal pieces. He used the temporary reprieve to build a better shelter. The metal beams made a good frame, and he found sheets of some kind of synthetic material buried in the snow that worked as walls. His plasma cutter provided both heat and light while he worked. As he built, he found more useful things scattered around the ruins. There was a device that looked like it might be some kind of heater, though it was clearly broken. There were containers that might have held food or water, all of them empty. And there were weapons, lots of weapons, most of them damaged or out of power. "Whoever was here before had a rough time," he muttered, examining a rifle that looked like it had been chewed on by something with very large teeth. The shelter took him 2 hours to build, but when he was done, it was solid and warm. The improvised electromagnetic field kept the ice creatures at bay, though they had not given up. He could see their glowing eyes watching him from the darkness beyond his small circle of light. Jinho opened a ration pack from his toolbox and ate while he thought about his situation. He was obviously not on Kepler Station anymore, though he had no idea how he had gotten here. The technology scattered around suggested this was some kind of test or training area, but it seemed like a very dangerous one. The broken heater caught his attention again. He pulled it apart with his tools and found that the power source was intact, just disconnected. The heating elements were damaged but replaceable. He had spare heating coils in his toolbox that were close enough to the right size. While he worked on the heater, he hummed an old song his mother used to sing. It helped him focus and made the howling wind seem less threatening. Meanwhile, in a control room thousands of miles away, Taewoo Choi stared at the monitoring screens in disbelief. The Nexari engineer had spent 3 years designing the Arctic Survival Zone, the first challenge of the Crucible. It was meant to test a participant's ability to survive in the harshest possible conditions while being hunted by frost stalkers, the most dangerous predators his people had ever created. The zone usually claimed half of all challengers within the first day. Even the survivors typically spent weeks learning to hunt the local wildlife and build adequate shelter from the available materials. But this human was treating the whole thing like a routine repair job. He had turned priceless Nexari artifacts into scrap metal, built an electromagnetic field generator from spare parts, and was now apparently fixing a piece of equipment that was supposed to be broken as part of the challenge. "Sir," said one of Taewoo's assistants, a young Nexari named Subin Kang, "the human has successfully repaired the thermal regulator, the one we broke on purpose to make survival more difficult." Taewoo watched as Jinho connected the heater to his improvised power system. Warm air began flowing into the shelter, making it comfortable enough that the human took off his jacket. "He is treating our most dangerous survival scenario like a camping trip," Taewoo said. "How is this possible?" On the screens, Jinho had finished his meal and was now examining more of the scattered equipment. He seemed genuinely curious about how everything worked. poking at devices with his tools and taking notes on a small tablet. The frost stalkers had given up trying to get past the electromagnetic field and were now hunting easier prey elsewhere. This was not supposed to happen. The creatures were designed to be relentless, never giving up once they had chosen a target. "Sir," Subin said quietly, "I think the human does not know he is being tested. He appears to believe this is some kind of industrial accident." Tewu considered this possibility. The human's behavior did match someone who thought he was dealing with a workplace emergency, rather than a life-or-death survival challenge. He showed no signs of the fear, desperation, or warrior's focus that characterized other challengers. Instead, he seemed mildly annoyed by the inconvenience and determined to make the best of a bad situation. "Alert the other zone designers," Tewu said. "They need to see this and contact the betting pools. They are going to want to recalculate their odds." In his warm shelter, Jinho had found what looked like a communication device among the scattered equipment. It was damaged, but not beyond repair. He began working on it, humming cheerfully while the alien wind howled outside and the greatest survival challenge in the galaxy failed to challenge him at all. The communication device crackled to life, just as the world around Jinho began to change again. The ice and snow faded away like smoke, replaced by thick green fog that smelled like rotten eggs mixed with industrial chemicals. "Well, that was weird," he said, coughing as the toxic air hit his lungs. He quickly pulled his work respirator from his toolbox and put it over his face. The simple device was designed for protection against welding fumes and paint vapors, but it helped with the worst of the smell. He found himself standing on what looked like a narrow path through a swamp. Dark water stretched away on both sides, covered with a film that reflected rainbow colors like spilled oil. Strange plants grew in the muck, their leaves dripping with substances that hissed when they hit the water. The fog was so thick he could barely see 20 feet in any direction. Somewhere in the distance, something large splashed in the water, followed by a sound like metal being crushed. "Great. Another industrial accident," Jinho muttered. He had worked cleanup on contaminated sites before. The key was to stay on solid ground, avoid breathing the bad air, and not touch anything that glowed. Several of the plants were glowing. He began walking along the path, testing each step carefully. The ground felt solid enough, though it was covered with the same oily film as the water. His boots squelched with each step. As he walked, he started collecting samples of the various substances he encountered. It was an old habit from his training days. Understanding what you were dealing with was the first step to fixing any problem. The metal items scattered through the swamp caught his attention. They looked like they had been dissolved and reformed, suggesting some kind of acid or corrosive agent in the environment. But the metal of his toolbox seemed unaffected, which meant the corrosion was probably specific to certain alloys. He found a piece of equipment half buried in the muck that looked like it might be some kind of analyzer. It was heavily corroded but still had power. Jinho cleaned it off as best he could and managed to get it working. The readings were interesting. The air contained several toxic compounds, but nothing he had not encountered before in badly maintained industrial facilities. The water was acidic, but not extremely so. The real danger seemed to be the biological agents in the environment. Several creatures moved through the swamp around him. He caught glimpses of them through the fog. Things with too many limbs that moved through the poisonous water like it was their natural home. They seemed curious about him but kept their distance. One creature, about the size of a small car and covered in what looked like living slime, approached the path where he was walking. It made gurgling sounds that might have been communication attempts. "Sorry, buddy. I do not speak whatever that is," Jinho said, continuing to walk. The creature followed him for a while, making more sounds, then slipped back into the dark water. He found more ruins as he progressed through the swamp. These were in worse condition than the ones in the ice zone, eaten away by the acidic environment. But there were still useful materials scattered around, including what looked like the components of a water purification system. "Now that is useful," he said, examining the corroded machinery. The basic principles were the same as the systems he had repaired on mining stations. With some improvisation, he could probably get it working again. It took him several hours to rebuild the purifier, but when he finished, it was producing clean, drinkable water from the toxic swamp. He filled his water bottle and continued walking. Meanwhile, news of the human in the crucible was spreading throughout the galaxy. Mina Lee, the human ambassador to the Nexari system, received an urgent message while attending a diplomatic reception. "Ambassador," her aide whispered, "we have a situation. A human has entered the crucible of existence." Mina nearly dropped her drink. The crucible was legendary throughout known space. It was a test that claimed the lives of the galaxy's greatest warriors. Only the most elite military units were even allowed to attempt it. "How did a human get access to the crucible?" she asked. "Our people are not even permitted on the same level of Kepler Station where it is located." "Unknown, Ambassador." "Dimai. Reports suggest it may have been an accident." Mina excused herself from the reception and rushed to the nearest communication center. She needed to contact Earth immediately and find out what kind of military operative they had sent to Nexari space. Back in the swamp, Jinho had discovered that the toxic environment was actually not that difficult to navigate once you understood the rules. The poisonous plants only released their worst chemicals when disturbed. The acid in the water was neutralized by certain minerals that were common in the area. The dangerous creatures were territorial but not actively aggressive unless threatened. It was like working in any hazardous industrial site. You learned the safety procedures, you used the right equipment, and you paid attention to your surroundings. He had even figured out how to use the local biology to his advantage. Some of the plants, when properly processed, produced compounds that neutralized the worst toxins in the air. Others could be used to create a kind of natural soap that cleaned the oily film off his equipment. The path through the swamp led to what looked like a maintenance station. There were workbenches, tool storage areas, and even a break room with tables and chairs. Everything was corroded and covered in slime, but the basic structure was sound. Jinho spent several hours cleaning and repairing the facility. It felt good to have a proper workspace again, even if it was in the middle of a toxic swamp. As he worked, he noticed that the environment around the station was becoming less hostile. The plants stopped glowing quite so brightly. The water became clearer. Even the fog began to thin out. "Looks like somebody had the right idea with this place," he said, examining what appeared to be environmental controls built into the station's walls. The system was designed to gradually clean up the surrounding area, but it had been offline for a long time. He managed to get the environmental systems partially online. It would take time to fully clean up the swamp, but the air was already becoming easier to breathe. In the Nexari Control Center, Taiwu Choi was having a heated discussion with his superiors. The human had not only survived the toxic swamp zone, but had actually improved it. The environmental restoration systems that were supposed to be permanently damaged were running again. "The swamp zone took us 5 years to design," said Counselor Varek, the head of the Crucible project. "It has killed some of our finest soldiers. How is this maintenance worker treating it like a routine cleanup job?" "I believe," said Subin Kang, studying the monitoring data, "the human comes from a species that regularly deals with environmental disasters. This type of challenge appears to be normal for them." On the screens, Jinho was eating lunch in his cleaned-up break room while reading a technical manual he had found. He seemed completely relaxed, as if sitting in a deadly alien swamp was the most natural thing in the world. The betting pools across the galaxy were in chaos as word spread about the humans' progress. What had started as a curiosity was becoming a phenomenon that challenged everything the major civilizations thought they knew about survival and adaptation. The clean break room faded away as Jinho finished his lunch, replaced by something that looked like the inside of a spaceship. But this ship was wrong in ways that made his eyes hurt to look at it directly. Corridors bent in impossible directions. Doors opened onto rooms that were bigger inside than outside. Gravity seemed to work sideways in some areas. Whoever designed this ship was either crazy or really bad at their job, Jinho said, looking around at the twisted architecture. He could hear voices echoing through the corridors, but when he followed the sounds, he found empty rooms. Sometimes he heard his own voice calling back to him from places he had never been. Other times the voices belonged to people he had known years ago. saying things that made his chest tight with old regrets. The psychological warfare zone of the Crucible was designed to break the minds of challengers by forcing them to confront their deepest fears and failures. Advanced alien technology created perfect simulations of traumatic memories and worst-case scenarios. Jinho heard his father's voice calling him a disappointment, just like the last time they had spoken before. The old man died. He heard his ex-wife Lisa telling him he would never amount to anything more than a grease monkey. He heard the screams of workers from that mining station accident 5 years ago, the one he still had nightmares about. Yeah, well, that is life, I guess, he said, continuing to walk through the impossible corridors. People say mean things sometimes, bad stuff happens, and you just got to keep going. The hallucinations became more intense. He saw himself failing at every job he had ever held. He watched scenarios where his mistakes led to explosions that killed hundreds of people. He experienced alternative versions of his life, where he had become an alcoholic, a criminal, or worse. But Jinho had learned long ago that feeling sorry for yourself was a waste of time. His father really had been disappointed in him, and maybe he had good reasons. Lisa really had thought he was a loser, and she was probably not wrong. He really had made mistakes that put people in danger. So what? Everyone made mistakes. Everyone disappointed somebody. Everyone had regrets. The trick was to learn from the bad stuff and try to do better next time. Besides, he said to a hallucination of himself dying alone and forgotten, I have got work to do. This ship is not going to fix itself. He began treating the psychological maze like any other repair job. The impossible architecture was just bad engineering that needed to be corrected. The twisted corridors were probably the result of a malfunctioning gravity generator. The voices were some kind of audio system gone haywire. He found control panels, hidden behind the reality distortions, and began making adjustments. Most of the settings were completely wrong, as if someone had been playing with equipment they did not understand. He reset the gravity to normal, adjusted the spatial configuration systems, and disabled what looked like a malfunctioning holographic projector. The ship began to make more sense as he worked. Corridors straightened out. Rooms became the proper size. The voices faded to a whisper and then stopped entirely. There we go, he said with satisfaction. Much better. On the Nixari homeworld, young Hoseo watched the monitoring screens with growing confusion. The chief architect of the Crucible had designed the psychological warfare zone to be inescapable. The technology used quantum-level brain scanning to create personalized torture scenarios that were impossible to distinguish from reality. The zone had broken the minds of military commanders, religious leaders, and trained assassins. Some challengers spent months trapped in their own worst nightmares before the mercy protocols finally ended their suffering. But the human had simply fixed the equipment and moved on, apparently unaware that he had just overcome technology that was thousands of years in advance of his species' capabilities. How is his mind so resistant to psychological manipulation? Asked Dr. Mirai Yoon, the project's chief psychologist. I do not think it is resistance, said Subin Kang, studying the brain scan data. I think he genuinely does not care about the things we are trying to use against him. His psychological profile shows someone who has already accepted his failures and limitations. That should make the attacks more effective, not less. Unless, Subin said thoughtfully, his species has evolved to be psychologically resilient, as a survival mechanism. They might face so much hardship in their normal lives that they develop immunity to despair. The next zone was even worse. The living maze was designed to adapt to each challenger, creating new obstacles and traps based on their behavior patterns. The harder someone fought against it, the stronger it became. The maze had trapped some of the galaxy's greatest tactical minds for years. Jinho found himself in a corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions. When he walked forward, new walls appeared behind him. When he tried to go back, the path changed. When he stood still, the walls began closing in. This is like that puzzle box my nephew had, he said, examining the shifting walls. The trick was not to fight it, but to work with it. Instead of trying to force his way through or outsmart the maze, he began following its natural flow. When walls appeared, He used them as supports for the equipment he was carrying. When the floor tilted, he let gravity help him move his toolbox. When the ceiling lowered, he crouched down and kept working. The maze was designed to frustrate and confuse, but Jinho treated it like a mechanical system that needed constant adjustment. He made small repairs to the wall mechanisms as he encountered them. He oiled squeaky hinges, tightened loose bolts, and replaced worn-out components. The maze began to respond differently to his presence. Instead of creating obstacles, it started helping him. Walls moved to provide better lighting for his work. Floors angled to make walking easier. Ceilings raised when he needed to reach high places. "See, you just needed a little maintenance, he told the maze, patting one of the walls affectionately. By the time he reached the end of the zone, the living maze was following him around like a helpful pet, rearranging itself to make his journey more comfortable. In the control center, the alien observers were running out of words to describe what they were seeing. The human had not conquered the maze through force or cunning. He had simply been so consistently kind and helpful to it that the artificial intelligence running the system had decided he was a maintenance worker rather than a challenger. "The maze thinks he is part of the staff," reported Taewoo in disbelief. "How is that possible?" asked Counselor Varric. "The human treats every challenge like a workplace problem that needs to be solved cooperatively rather than competitively. The AIs are responding to his collaborative approach rather than his invasive presence." Mina Lee had finally reached Kepler Station and was demanding answers from Hana Park in the administration office. "You have to understand, Ambassador," Hana said. "This was completely accidental. Your people was just looking for a repair job when he stumbled into the crucible." "My people," Mina said slowly, "does not have any military operatives in this sector. Are you telling me that an ordinary civilian has been surviving the galaxy's deadliest challenge for the past 18 hours? That appears to be the case." Mina stared at the monitoring screens where Jinho was now sharing his lunch with the living maze, which had reconfigured itself into the shape of a picnic table. "What kind of repair work does he do?" she asked weakly. "Environmental systems, mostly. Ship maintenance, industrial cleanup, that sort of thing." "Oh no," Mina said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Oh no, no, no. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to interstellar relations? Every military in the galaxy is going to want to study human civilians. They are going to think we have been hiding our capabilities." On the screens, Jinho finished his meal and waved goodbye to the maze, which waved back with several of its walls. Then he walked through the exit portal, completely unaware that he had just redefined what the galaxy thought was possible. The portal deposited Jinho into what looked like the inside of a star. Everything around him glowed with intense heat and light that should have killed him instantly. Streams of plasma flowed like rivers of liquid fire. The air itself seemed to be burning, but somehow he was not dead. A shimmering field surrounded him, protecting him from the worst of the heat. His coveralls were getting warm, but not dangerously so. "Well, this is new," he said, looking around at the hellish landscape. In the distance, he could see what appeared to be a massive machine of some kind, built from materials that glowed like the heart of a fusion reactor. The machine was clearly broken. Parts of it were spinning when they should be still. Other parts had stopped moving entirely. Streams of energy were flowing in the wrong directions, creating dangerous feedback loops that made the whole structure shake and spark. Jinho recognized the signs of a catastrophic system failure. He had seen similar problems in the fusion plants that powered deep space mining operations. If this machine was not fixed soon, it was probably going to explode in a way that would make everyone's day much worse. He started walking toward the machine, staying inside the protective field. As he got closer, he could see that the problem was even worse than he had thought. This was not just one machine, but an entire complex of interconnected systems, all of them failing at the same time. The design was incredibly advanced, using technology he did not recognize. But the basic principles were the same as any power generation system. You had inputs, outputs, regulators, and safety systems. When something went wrong, you traced the problem back to its source and fixed it. The first issue was obvious. A massive, Conduit that was supposed to carry energy from one part of the machine to another had cracked, allowing power to leak out in dangerous bursts. The leaked energy was interfering with other systems, creating a cascade failure. Jinho examined the crack with his portable scanner. The conduit was made of some kind of exotic matter that he had never encountered before, but the principles of structural repair were universal. He needed to seal the crack and restore proper energy flow. His plasma cutter could not work on this material, but he found that his ultrasonic welder produced interesting results. The exotic matter responded to high-frequency vibrations by becoming temporarily malleable. With careful work, he was able to seal the crack. Immediately, the energy leak stopped and several of the machine's subsystems began working properly again. "One down, about 50 to go," he said, moving to the next problem area. The machine was enormous, extending in all directions further than he could see. Every section had multiple problems that needed to be addressed, but Jinho had worked on complex industrial systems before. The trick was to prioritize, fix the most dangerous problems first, then work your way down to the minor issues. He spent hours crawling through access tunnels, adjusting control systems, and replacing burned-out components with improvised alternatives from his toolbox. The machine began to respond to his repairs, its system slowly coming back into proper alignment. As he worked, he started to understand what the machine actually was. It seemed to be some kind of reality engine, a device that could create and maintain artificial environments on a massive scale. The different zones of the crucible were probably generated by this system. "No wonder everything was so weird," he said, realigning a quantum flux regulator that had been installed backwards. Somebody really did not know what they were doing when they set this up. The hardest part was not the repairs themselves, but figuring out what the machine was supposed to do in the first place. The alien designers had built it to be incredibly complex, with multiple redundant systems and safety protocols that seemed designed more to impress people than to actually work efficiently. Jinho began simplifying things as he went. He bypassed unnecessary subsystems, streamlined control pathways, and eliminated redundancies that were causing conflicts. The machine began running more smoothly with each modification. In the Nexari control center, panic had set in. Myung-jun, the previous record holder for surviving the crucible, watched in horror as the human casually rewrote the fundamental architecture of their most sacred challenge. "He is destroying everything we built," Myung said. "The Heart of Stars took our greatest minds 50 years to construct. It was supposed to be the ultimate test of intelligence and willpower." "Sir," said Subin Kang, "the efficiency readings are actually improving. The human appears to be fixing problems we did not even know we had. That is not the point. The test was supposed to be impossible. The whole idea was that challengers would spend months trying to understand the puzzle before they could even begin to solve it." On the screens, Jinho was humming while he worked, apparently finding the reality-altering supercomputer to be only moderately more complicated than the heating systems he usually repaired. "How long did it take you to complete this zone?" Subin asked Myung. 6 months, the former champion admitted. 6 months of studying the quantum mechanics, learning the temporal dynamics, mastering the energy flow patterns. It nearly drove me insane. The human has been working for 4 hours and he is almost finished. That is impossible. He cannot possibly understand the theoretical framework underlying the system. "I do not think he is trying to understand the theory," Subin said thoughtfully. "He is just fixing whatever looks broken." This was exactly what Jinho was doing. He did not need to understand the advanced physics behind the reality engine. He just needed to make it work properly. And despite all its complexity, it was still just a machine with inputs, outputs, and control systems. The final problem was in the machine's central core, where all the energy flows converged. The designers had created an elaborate puzzle that was supposed to require deep understanding of multidimensional mathematics to solve, but Jinho could see that the real issue was much simpler. The central regulator was stuck. It was an elegant piece of equipment, covered in symbols and glowing with inner light, but at its heart was a mechanical component that had seized up from lack of maintenance. Jinho sprayed some lubricant on it, gave it a few taps with his wrench, and it started moving freely again. The entire machine shuddered and then settled into a smooth, efficient operating rhythm. The chaotic energy flows organized themselves into stable patterns. The reality distortions that had made the environment so dangerous smoothed out into a comfortable park-like setting. "There we go," Jinho said with satisfaction. "Running like a dream now." He looked around at the transformed environment and nodded approvingly. Instead of a hellish plasma storm, he was now standing in a pleasant garden with blue skies and comfortable temperature. A path led toward what looked like an exit portal in the distance. "Much better," he said, packing up his tools. "I should probably get back to that repair job on level 47. People are going to wonder where I went." In the control center, absolute silence had fallen. The most advanced challenge ever created by galactic civilization had been reduced to a routine maintenance call. "How long was he in the final zone?" asked Counselor Varric in a whisper. 4 hours and 23 minutes, Subin reported. "My time was 6 months, Myung said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "The previous record before that was 8 months, added Tae Woo. "And he fixed everything we deliberately broke," said Dr. Yoon. "The system is now operating at 97% efficiency. We have never seen numbers that high." They watched as the human walked calmly toward the exit, apparently unaware that he had just accomplished something that would be talked about for centuries. He was checking his watch and muttering about being late for work. "Alert all the major civilizations," Counselor Varric said finally. "We need to completely reevaluate our understanding of human capabilities. And someone find out where these people learned to fix impossible machines with hand tools and good intentions." On the screens, Jinho Kim disappeared through the exit portal, completing the crucible of existence in 23 hours and 17 minutes. He had not conquered the galaxy's greatest challenge through superior skill or knowledge. He had simply been nice to it and fixed the parts that were broken. Jinho stepped out of the portal and found himself back in the blue-lit room where this whole strange experience had started. He looked around, confused. The countdown timer on the wall was showing all zeros, and the screens were displaying what looked like celebration messages in a dozen different languages. "Well, that was weird," he said, picking up his toolbox. "I wonder if I can find my way back to level 47 now." The circular door opened as he approached it, leading back to the crystal corridor he had walked down hours earlier. But now, the corridor was full of people, aliens of every shape and size, all of them staring at him with expressions he could not read. A human woman pushed through the crowd, looking frantic and official. She was wearing the kind of expensive business suit that meant she worked for the government. "Are you Jinho Kim?" she asked urgently. "Yeah, that is me. Are you here about the heating repair job? Because I got a little turned around and I am really sorry about being late." The woman stared at him for a moment, then looked around at the crowd of aliens who were watching this conversation with intense interest. "Mr. Kim," she said carefully, "I am Ambassador Mina Lee. I represent Earth in this sector. We need to talk." "Oh, okay. Am I in trouble? Because I did not break anything on purpose." "Well, except for that stuff in the ice place, but it was already broken when I got there." Mina took his arm and guided him away from the crowd, toward a conference room that had been hastily prepared for this meeting. Behind them, she could hear the aliens beginning to talk excitedly in their various languages. "Mr. Kim," she said, once they were alone, "do you know what you just did?" "Not really. I was looking for level 47 and I got lost, and then there were all these broken machines that needed fixing. I figured it was some kind of industrial accident." Mina sat down heavily in one of the chairs. "The crucible of existence is the most difficult survival challenge in known space. Military elites train for years just for the chance to attempt it. Most of them die in the first few hours." Jinho frowned. "That does not sound very safe. There should be better safety protocols." "You completed it in less than a day. The previous record was 6 months. The machines were not that complicated once you figured out what was wrong with them. Mostly they just needed basic maintenance." "Basic maintenance," Mina repeated weakly. "You treated the galaxy's ultimate challenge like basic maintenance." "Well, yeah. What else would I treat it like?" Meanwhile, news of the humans' achievement was spreading across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. On the Nexari homeworld, emergency council sessions were being called. On Zephyrian military bases, generals were demanding full analyses of human capabilities. On 100 other worlds, scientists and philosophers were arguing about what this meant for their understanding of intelligence and survival. Doha Lim, Earth's senior diplomat, was having the worst day of his career. His communication system had been ringing constantly for the past 2 hours with calls from alien governments. "Ambassador Lim," said the Nexari counselor on his main screen, "we must discuss immediate alliance negotiations. Your species clearly possesses survival capabilities far beyond what we previously understood." "With respect, counselor," Doha said tiredly, "we have been trying to tell you that for years. Humans are very good at adapting to difficult situations. We thought you were exaggerating for diplomatic purposes. We were not." On another screen, a Zephyrian military commander was making demands. "Earth must provide detailed information about your training methods. How do you prepare civilians to overcome challenges that defeat our elite soldiers?" "We do not have special training methods," Doha explained for the 5th time. "Mr. Kim is an ordinary repair technician. He learned his skills through normal work experience. Impossible. No ordinary being could accomplish what he did. And yet here we are." A third screen showed the representative from the Galactic Safety Council. "Earth civilians must be restricted to designated safe zones until we can properly assess their capabilities. They pose a potential risk to established galactic order." "Absolutely not," Doha said firmly. "Our people have the right to travel freely through space, same as anyone else." Back on Kepler Station, Jinho was getting increasingly confused by all the attention he was receiving. Hana Park had joined the meeting and was trying to explain the situation. "You have to understand," she said. "The Crucible is not just a challenge. It is a sacred test that represents the pinnacle of what we thought was possible for biological beings to achieve." "It was just a bunch of broken machines," Jinho said. "Really complicated broken machines, but still just machines. I do not understand why everyone is so excited." "Because you made it look easy," Mina said. "Things that are supposed to be easy do not kill thousands of the galaxy's best warriors." "Well, maybe those warriors should have brought better tools." That moment, Subin Kang arrived with a team of Nexari scientists. The young researcher looked excited and nervous as she approached the human. "Mr. Kim," she said in careful English, "would you be willing to answer some questions about your methods?" "I guess so." "What do you want to know?" "How did you know to repair the reality engine's central regulator?" "The what now?" "The machine in the final zone. You solved a puzzle that was supposed to require months of study in less than 5 hours." Jinho shrugged. "It was stuck. You could hear it grinding from across the room. I just gave it some oil and tapped it with a wrench until it started working again." Subin stared at him. "You did not calculate the quantum resonance frequencies, or map the dimensional matrices. I do not know what any of those words mean. But how did you know the machine would respond to mechanical manipulation?" "All machines respond to mechanical manipulation if you know where to hit them." The Nexari scientists began talking rapidly among themselves in their own language. Jinho could not understand the words, but their tone suggested they were either very excited or very upset. "Are they okay?" he asked Mina. "I think they are having an existential crisis," she replied. "Their entire technological philosophy is based on the idea that complex problems require complex solutions." "That is dumb," Jinho said. "Complex problems usually happen because simple things are not working right. Fix the simple things and the complex problems go away." More aliens began arriving at the station as word spread. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to meet the human who had redefined what they thought was possible. The betting pools that had been taking wagers on Crucible challengers were in complete chaos. Jinho was getting tired of all the questions and attention. He just wanted to finish his repair job and go home. "Look," he said to the growing crowd of aliens, "I am glad I could help fix your broken challenge thing, but I really do need to get to level 47. People are depending on me to fix their heating system." "The heating system can wait," Mina said. "This is much more important." Not to the people who are cold, it is not. This simple statement caused another round of intense discussion among the alien observers. The concept that a mundane repair job could be more important than a galaxy-changing achievement was apparently difficult for them to understand. Hannah Park finally intervened. Mr. Kim, if you are determined to complete your original job, I can escort you to level 47. But I should warn you, there are probably going to be a lot more people wanting to talk to you after this. As long as they do not get in the way of my work, Jinho said, picking up his toolbox. As they left the conference room, Subin Kang approached Mina with a final question. Ambassador, she said quietly, are all humans like him? Mina thought about the billions of people back on Earth, mechanics and farmers and teachers and shopkeepers, all of them going about their daily lives with the same practical problem-solving attitude that had just shocked the galaxy. Pretty much, she said. This changes everything, Subin whispered, I know. And with that, Jinho Kim walked off to fix a heating system, completely unaware that he had just started a revolution in how the galaxy thought about intelligence, survival, and the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things simply by treating problems as problems to be solved rather than challenges to be conquered. The crucible of existence was permanently retired the next day, not because it was too dangerous, but because a human maintenance worker had made it too easy.